question is, how did you start writing?
I started writing, creative writing, in second grade, actually, because my beloved dog died, and I wrote a poem for him, and took it to school, and everybody made a big deal out of it. Said, oh, how wonderful. And I thought, oh, this is good. I can have people pay attention to me and get excited about what I'm doing because I wrote a poem. So that's how I started, and I never stopped.
And what do you enjoy most about being a poet?
That's a good question. One of the main things I think I actually enjoy, and I don't know if people say this very often, is the performance. I have an undergraduate double major in theater, and didn't get to act as much as I would have liked. And so for me, poetry reading is a lot about the performance. You get the energy from the people in the crowd and the rhythm of the works and how you read them, and I really love that. The other thing about being a poet, I think, is that it just gives me a little bit different way to look at the world, a way to think about the connections between people, between us and the world, in a way that gives some soul back to being a human being.
And how would you categorize your work?
My work, particularly in my most recent book, Work is Love Made Visible, is a poetry that's got a lot of, it's a narrative kind of poetry. Almost all my poems tell some kind of story. But it's kind of a hybrid narrative poetry because it's also heavily in images within the story. So kind of a hybrid lyric narrative poetry. And right now while I'm writing, I tend to be in writing in a storytelling kind of plain language voice. That may change in the future. I'm finished with this book. I'm ready to start on another one, so we'll see what happens.
And what do you want your readers to take away from your writing?
I want my readers to take away some joy. There's always some sorrow there as well. But the biggest thing, I think, is some sense of their own humanity. I don't think I can say it any better than that.
And what advice do you have for young writers?
Read, particularly for poetry. A lot of people say, yeah, I write poetry, and then you ask, well, who do you read? And they don't have an answer. You really can't write poetry unless you read poetry. You really can't write fiction unless you read fiction. But particularly with poetry, you just need to read all kinds of poetry from different eras, different types. You can also go through periods where you have one favorite poet and you read nothing but their work. But that's the biggest advice, is read good poetry.
And what would you say is the hardest part about being a poet?
Being alone. It's very much an individual kind of art. And sometimes I find myself not getting out of the house often enough. And I think my poetry suffers when I do. I belong to a women poets mailing list, so there's a lot of other women poets on that list, and we have a conversation that we don't get to have in person very often. But I would say that was the most difficult thing, is kind of being oddball and being alone. And
as your career as a poet, what would you say has been your most, defining moment, or, just a moment that you've sat and you're like, I really made it, you know?
That happened on the 15th of March. I had won a national chapbook competition before, and that was really exciting. But this is the first time that I had a squareback book, a full-length book, and by a press that's West End Press, that's very well regarded among poetry presses. And so when the publicity started coming out for that book, it was like, oh my gosh, I'm a real poet now. So I would say that just happened last month.
And what are some things that you hope to achieve in the future as far as writing?
I actually read publicly my first fiction piece this weekend at the Scissortail Creative Writing Festival down in Ada, and it was well received, I'm happy to say. So I'm thinking about writing some more short stories. I don't want to think about a novel. That's just too long for me. But short stories I think I can do. I'm going to push my poetry in some directions I haven't been before. Some stylistic changes, or at least some stylistic expansion to try some new things. It's on the table to plan. And I'm going to spend the next year reading a lot of poetry craft books, which I haven't had much time to do, by other poets who talk about how they work and what their work means to them, to kind of make a self-study of some of the poets and their writings that I love the best. So that's where I'm going.
And from your personal canon, who are some writers that you would suggest to up-and-coming writers?
Oh, that's really hard, because it would be easier if I knew that up-and-coming writer and what their styles were looking like, because then I could say, here's someone whose style that you might find interesting. But I do have a series of poets I return to often. One of them is Dorian Lau, who has 3 books out, and she's just powerful. I can't explain it any other way. Lorna D. Cervantes, who I've been reading since her first book was out when we were both about 22, and she has a new book out called Drive, and she feels like my old friend, although I've never met her. James Wright, who's one of the 1950s and 60s poets who are oftentimes lumped under the School of Quietude label, I find him just astounding still, especially his book, The Branch Will Not Break. Let's see. And actually, I love some of the metaphysicals from the 17th century. Their work is magical. John Donne.
And where are the places that you, I guess, find inspiration?
Believe it or not, Oklahoma. I came home after being gone for 25 years. I left here when I was 18 as fast as I could get out, and found myself desperately homesick for the land here. And I'm also trying to make peace with some of the culture here, the good and the bad. And my last book is, the center of it is this place, so a sense of place. Another place I find inspiration is actually in headlines, stories of human beings doing the best they can under difficult circumstances. I think those are worthy of a poem.
And in your most recent book, I know that family is a big role, so would you say?
Yes, family is a huge role, and it's funny because, for me, Oklahoma and family are inseparable. So when I said Oklahoma, it also meant family. Both Native American, non-Native American, we've been here since well before statehood on all sides. And we rooted well here. And so, yes, Oklahoma and family are inseparable, and especially the women in my family who are just strong, outrageous Okie women, You just don't tell them they can't do something unless you want it to be done. So, fabulous women.
And is there anything else you'd like to add?
I would like to add, I think it's really wonderful that the Mark Allen Everett Poetry Reading Series is not just bringing people in from the outside, but is also turning around to look in our own backyard and inviting Steve Sexton and I to read. I think that's just outstanding, because a lot of poetry reading series always look outside and forget to look inside, and I want to give my gratitude for that.